Close your eyes for a moment and picture your future with absolute clarity and vivid detail. See yourself living the life you've always dreamed of, experiencing the success you've longed for, surrounded by the abundance you deserve. Because that image you're holding right now, that crystal, clear vision dancing in your mind's eye, is infinitely more powerful than your current reality, more influential than your present circumstances, and more creative than any external force you could ever encounter. That's not just a beautiful poetic idea or an inspiring motivational concept. It's spiritual law operating with mathematical precision. It's the fundamental principle that governs how consciousness creates reality, how thoughts become things, and how the invisible realm of imagination transforms into the visible world of experience. Every great shift in your life, every meaningful transformation you've ever experienced, every breakthrough that changed your trajectory forever, starts with one thing and one thing only: a clear picture held with unwavering belief, sustained with emotion, and nurtured with consistent mental rehearsal. And that, my friend, is the true power of your imagination, a force so profound that Florence Scovel Shinn built her entire teaching around it, so transformative that Neville Goddard dedicated his life to mastering it, and so practical that today, I'm here to show you exactly how to harness it for your own miraculous demonstrations. Before we dive deep into these life-changing principles, please hit that like button if this message is already resonating with something deep within your soul. Your engagement helps this transformative knowledge reach more people who desperately need to understand the creative power of their own imagination. And make sure to subscribe with notifications on, because I'll be sharing more profound teachings that can revolutionize how you create your reality. Your imagination is not just for daydreaming, idle fantasy, or escapist entertainment. It's not something you use only when you're bored or trying to pass time. Your imagination is the sacred blueprint of your destiny, the divine architect of your future, the creative workshop where tomorrow's reality is designed and constructed today. Whatever you consistently imagine with genuine feeling and unwavering belief, whether good or challenging, positive or negative, you inevitably attract into your experience. This is not theory or speculation. It's immutable spiritual law that operates with the same reliability as gravity or magnetism. You don't get what you want through wishful thinking. You don't even get what you say through empty affirmations or mechanical repetitions. You get what you imagine with authentic feeling, sustained emotion, and complete conviction. The subconscious mind responds not to your conscious desires, but to your dominant mental images, not to your spoken words, but to your felt experiences in imagination. Most people live their entire lives reacting to circumstances, responding to conditions, and allowing external events to dictate their internal state. They wait for life to happen to them, hoping that somehow, someday, things will magically improve without any conscious direction from them. But a precious few, those rare individuals who understand the profound power of disciplined thought and controlled imagery, they create life instead of merely experiencing it. They don't wait for conditions to be perfect before they begin imagining their ideal reality. They don't postpone their mental rehearsals until everything aligns externally. They understand that creation begins in consciousness, not in circumstances. Let me ask you something that might shake you to your core. Are you currently imagining fear, failure, rejection, disappointment, or loss? Because if so, you're already manifesting these experiences with precision and power. Your imagination is working perfectly. It's simply working against your conscious desires, instead of for them. Florence Scovel Shinn understood this principle with crystal clarity. She said, "Imagination is the scissors of the mind. It cuts out whatever picture you hold consistently and repeatedly." Think about the profound implications of this statement. Your imagination is literally cutting out, shaping, and creating the template that your life will follow. So, I must ask you directly. What picture are you cutting out right now in the workshop of your mind? What scenes are you rehearsing in the theater of your imagination? What experiences are you giving emotional weight to in your mental rehearsals? If your mind keeps returning obsessively to worry, lack, confusion, limitation, or defeat, then this video is your spiritual wake-up call. Because the subconscious mind, that faithful servant of your consciousness, doesn't care whether your mental images are beneficial or harmful, empowering or limiting, beautiful or terrifying. It simply responds to whatever you feed it consistently, reproducing in your outer experience whatever you've impressed upon it through repetition and emotion. In this comprehensive teaching, I'll walk you through exactly how to realign your imagination with your desires, how to rewire your mental patterns for success instead of struggle, and how to start seeing tangible results faster than you ever thought possible. This isn't theoretical philosophy or abstract metaphysics. This is a practical principle that's been tested, proven, and demonstrated by visionaries, artists, entrepreneurs, and spiritual masters for over a century. The moment you take complete control of the movie, playing continuously in your mind, your outer world begins to shift, transform, and reorganize itself to match your inner vision. This is not coincidence or wishful thinking. It's the law of correspondence in action. Let's go much deeper into this transformative understanding. You don't need elaborate vision boards cluttering your walls. You don't need hours of complicated affirmations that exhaust your mental energy. You don't need expensive seminars or complex rituals that promise results but deliver confusion. What you truly need is to understand one fundamental truth. Your imagination is always working, every moment of every day, whether you're consciously directing it or not. The crucial question that will determine your entire life experience is this: is your imagination working in your favor or against it? Florence Scovel Shinn knew with absolute certainty that imagination wasn't some magical trick reserved for specially gifted individuals, some mystical ability that only advanced practitioners could access, or some new age concept disconnected from practical reality. She understood that imagination operates according to a spiritual law of correspondence that governs the relationship between the invisible realm of consciousness and the visible realm of experience. Whatever picture you hold consistently in the invisible dimension of your mind, the visible world of your circumstances, must reflect with mathematical precision. It's not a maybe. It's not sometimes. It's not dependent on your worthiness, your past, your education, or your current situation. It's automatic, immediate, and absolutely reliable. Let me present this truth in a way that might revolutionize your understanding. You are always manifesting, every single moment of your existence. Even when you're not consciously trying to create specific outcomes. Even when you think you're passively waiting for something external to change. Even when you believe you're taking a break from any kind of mental discipline. Your subconscious mind is working tirelessly, operating continuously, pulling situations, people, and experiences that match your dominant mental images. So please, stop saying, "I don't know how to visualize properly," or "I don't see clear pictures in my mind," or "I'm not good at imagination." These statements are not only false but actively destructive to your creative power. That's absolutely not true, and here's the proof. When you're lying awake at night, worrying about what might go wrong tomorrow, that's visualization in action. When you replay that embarrassing moment from last week, over and over in your mind, feeling the same emotions each time, that's powerful mental rehearsal. When you imagine the worst case scenario before an important meeting or conversation, that's using your imagination with precision and intensity. You already know exactly how to imagine with feeling. You're already an expert at mental rehearsal. You're already skilled at creating vivid internal experiences that generate real emotions and physical responses. Now it's time to learn how to use this natural ability for your benefit, instead of your detriment. Here's what Florence Scovel Shinn would say to you if she were sitting beside you right now. Start immediately seeing your life as you desire it to be, not as it currently appears to be. And don't just imagine your desired reality casually, like a passing thought that flickers through your awareness and disappears. Feel it with every fiber of your being. Step completely into the role of the person who already possesses what you're seeking. Act internally as if your wish is already fulfilled, your goal already achieved, your desire already manifested. What would that successful version of you look like when they wake up each morning? How would they talk to themselves and others throughout the day? What thoughts would occupy their mind? What emotions would fill their heart? What energy would they carry into every interaction? Hold that empowered image with unshakable faith and complete conviction. And then trust your subconscious mind to do the intricate work of bridging your inner reality with your outer experience. You don't need to figure out the how, manipulate the circumstances, or force the timing. Let's get something absolutely straight that will liberate you from years of struggle and frustration. You're not creating your desired outcome from absolute nothing, building something that has never existed before, or trying to manifest something impossible or unrealistic. The version of your life that you desire, the relationships, the career, the health, the abundance, the peace, the joy, already exists in perfect, complete form in the invisible realm of infinite possibility. Your imagination is simply the bridge, the connecting link, the transportation system that brings it from the realm of potential into the realm of actual experience. If you want to transform your career situation, your romantic relationships, your physical body, your financial circumstances, or any other aspect of your life experience, you must first and foremost change your internal image of yourself, not your social media image that you carefully curate for others to see, not the persona you perform for family and friends, but the deep, private, intimate image you hold of yourself in your silent moments. The image that only you see when you're alone with your thoughts, before falling asleep at night. That's the real you. That's the blueprint your subconscious uses to create your reality. And that's the image that must change, if you want your circumstances to change. And here's the liberating truth that can transform your life starting today. If you don't like the current image, you possess the power to change it completely, immediately, and permanently. Let's examine someone who didn't just talk about imagination as an interesting concept, but actually lived this truth repeatedly, demonstrating its power through his own remarkable life transformations. Neville Goddard represents one of the most compelling examples of imagination, creating reality in modern spiritual history. Neville was born into humble circumstances in Barbados and moved to New York as a young man with no money in his pockets, no influential family connections to open doors for him, and no formal education to impress potential employers. By conventional standards, he had every reason to expect a life of limitation and struggle. But what Neville did possess was something infinitely more valuable than external advantages: a deep, unwavering belief in the unlimited power of the disciplined mind and the creative force of controlled imagination. He discovered Florence Scovel Shinn's revolutionary work and brilliantly aligned it with his own profound understanding of Scripture and the operation of the subconscious mind. Here's exactly what Neville would do, and this technique transformed his entire life repeatedly. He would enter a quiet, meditative state just before sleep, when the conscious mind naturally becomes passive, and the subconscious becomes extraordinarily receptive. In this twilight state, he would visualize, not just see but genuinely feel himself already living the life he desired with complete sensory involvement. Neville's famous instruction was revolutionary in its simplicity and power. Live in the end. Not in hope for the future, not in trying to make something happen, not in effort and strain, but in the calm knowing that comes from already possessing what you seek. When he wanted to travel the world but couldn't afford even a single ticket, he didn't focus on his lack of money or limited options. Instead, he imagined with vivid detail, holding his passport in his hands, feeling its weight and texture. He imagined the excitement of stepping off the ship in exotic destinations, breathing foreign air, seeing new landscapes, meeting interesting people. He made these imaginary experiences so real, so detailed, so emotionally compelling that his subconscious mind accepted them as accomplished facts rather than wishful fantasies. And then something remarkable happened. Within weeks, unexpected opportunities appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Someone offered him the exact travel opportunity he had been imagining. He got the ticket without struggle or strain. He took the journey that had seemed impossible. But here's the crucial point that most people miss. Neville didn't try to force the how. He didn't exhaust himself trying to manipulate circumstances or convince people to help him. He didn't worry about the logistics or stress about the details. He simply aligned his inner reality with his desired outer experience and trusted the creative intelligence of his subconscious to arrange the bridge of events. That's the core of what Florence Scovel Shinn teaches as well. And it's absolutely essential that you understand this distinction. You don't manifest by chasing external conditions, pleading with other people, or trying to manipulate circumstances through force or cleverness. You manifest by becoming internally the person who already possesses what you seek. You don't need to change, control, or manipulate the external world through exhausting effort. You need to discipline, direct, and master your inner world of thoughts, images, and emotions. Once your inner world aligns with your desires, your outer world has no choice but to conform to that inner pattern. Florence would tell you with absolute conviction. Whatever you ask for in prayer, if you feel in your heart that it's already accomplished, you will receive it in your experience. This isn't magic, wishful thinking, or spiritual bypassing of practical reality. It's spiritual law operating with the same reliability as any physical law. Neville understood this principle so deeply that he trained his imagination like a world-class athlete trains their body with discipline, consistency, and unwavering commitment to excellence. He didn't wait for external conditions to be logical, reasonable, or obviously possible. He trusted the unseen realm of consciousness more than the visible realm of circumstances. And this trust was consistently rewarded with miraculous demonstrations. So the fundamental question you must answer honestly is this: are you imagining your life as it currently appears to be, focusing on present limitations and reinforcing existing patterns? Or are you imagining your life as it could be, as you want it to be, as it's meant to be when aligned with your highest potential? Because either way, whether you're imagining limitation or possibility, struggle or ease, lack or abundance, your subconscious mind will faithfully deliver experiences that match your dominant mental images. Remember this transformative truth with absolute clarity. If Neville could demonstrate these principles repeatedly with no initial money, no special privileges, no perfect background, and no external advantages, then you absolutely can too. You don't need to be perfect, spiritually advanced, or completely free of doubt. You just need to be intentional, consistent, and willing to trust your imagination more than your current circumstances. Imagination isn't pretending that something false is true or denying obvious reality. Imagination is pre-living, pre-experiencing, and pre-feeling the reality you're in the process of creating. It's not fantasy, it's preview. So start living your desired reality, now in your imagination before it manifests in your physical experience. What you consistently imagine with authentic feeling. you inevitably invite into your life. What you emotionally invest in during your mental rehearsals, you automatically amplify and accelerate in your experience. Florence Scovel Shinn didn't just write about these principles from theoretical understanding. She lived them, demonstrated them, and proved them repeatedly in her own life and in the lives of thousands of students who applied her teachings with faith and consistency. But let's bring this profound teaching to life with someone whose remarkable journey you probably already know intimately: J.K. Rowling. Before the worldwide fame, before the best-selling books, before the movie adaptations and theme parks, she was a single mother living on welfare, battling severe depression, and writing in cold cafes because she couldn't afford heating in her small apartment. Her external circumstances suggested limitation, struggle, and very little reason for hope. But she possessed one thing that kept her moving forward, through the darkest times: a vivid, compelling vision that felt more real to her than her temporary circumstances. A mental picture of the magical world she was creating, populated with characters who had become as real to her as actual people. Hogwarts wasn't just a fantasy location she invented for entertainment. It was a vivid, detailed, consistent image in her mind that she could visit whenever she chose, a place she knew as intimately as her own neighborhood. She imagined this world in such intricate detail that it felt more substantial, more lasting, and more true to her than her external circumstances of poverty and struggle. She didn't just write Harry Potter stories. She lived in that world internally, experienced it emotionally, and believed in its reality. Before a single publisher recognized its value, she kept this vision alive and growing when 12 publishers said no to her manuscript. But her inner reality remained unchanged, because she understood instinctively what Florence Scovel Shinn taught. The outer world must eventually conform to the inner world, when the inner world is held with sufficient consistency and emotional conviction. She kept imagining millions of readers around the world discovering her stories, connecting with her characters, and finding magic in the world she had created. And eventually, inevitably, the external world caught up with her internal reality. This is precisely what Florence meant by the statement: imagination creates reality. It's not idle daydreaming or wishful thinking. It's mental discipline of the highest order. It's giving more weight, more attention, and more emotional investment to what you believe and see inside than to what you observe and experience outside. Every time you close your eyes and genuinely feel the life you want, you're not just fantasizing. You're rehearsing for it. You're preparing your energy system, aligning your vibration, sending a clear signal to the creative forces of the universe, and somehow, mysteriously, the world eventually responds to match your inner state. Not because you forced anything or manipulated anyone, but because you became completely aligned with the reality you desired to experience. Your thoughts, emotions, expectations, and actions all began pointing in the same direction, creating an unstoppable momentum toward your vision. What are you aligning with today in your mental rehearsals? Are you spending precious mental energy imagining doubt, disappointment, rejection, and fear? Are you giving emotional weight to worst-case scenarios and unlikely disasters? Or are you imagining something so beautiful, so compelling, and so aligned with your heart's deepest desires that it starts to feel familiar, natural, and inevitable? Are you rehearsing success, confidence, love, abundance, and joy with the same intensity you once gave to worry and fear? You are not just a passive thinker, responding to random thoughts. You are an active creator consciously choosing which thoughts to develop, which images to sustain, and which emotions to cultivate. Your imagination is not mere decoration or entertainment. It's the blueprint, the architectural plan, the detailed design from which your life experience is constructed. As Florence said with profound wisdom, there is an invisible power in your words and thoughts. They are constantly building the world you live in, creating the conditions you experience, and attracting the people and situations that fill your days. Your current reality, whether satisfying or frustrating, abundant or limited, peaceful or chaotic, is not the final word on what's possible for you. It's simply the latest result, the most recent harvest of everything you've imagined, accepted, believed, and allowed up until this moment. Florence Scovel Shinn didn't just teach general manifestation principles or vague positive thinking. She taught mental precision, conscious creation, and deliberate alignment with spiritual law. She understood that most people are creating their reality by default rather than by design. They wake up each morning and automatically react to whatever circumstances present themselves. They think the same habitual thoughts they thought yesterday, feel the same limiting emotions they've been carrying for years, repeat the same self-defeating stories they've been telling themselves for decades, and then wonder with growing frustration why nothing ever changes in their experience. But here's the truth that can liberate you from this unconscious cycle. The world around you is constantly mirroring your internal state with perfect accuracy. Your outer conditions are always reflecting your inner convictions. Your circumstances are continuously corresponding to your consciousness. That's not philosophical theory or spiritual philosophy. That's practical power you can begin using immediately. When you consciously begin to hold a specific image of yourself and your life, not just once in a moment of inspiration, but every single day with clear intention, genuine emotion, and unwavering clarity, you begin to turn the tide of your entire experience. Most people wait for external proof before they're willing to believe in their dreams. They want to see evidence before they'll invest emotional energy in their visions. They demand guarantees before they'll commit to their desires. But Florence understood and taught the opposite sequence. You believe first, completely and without reservation. You imagine the fulfillment of your desires as already accomplished. You act as if your vision is already true, already manifested, already your living reality. And then, as a natural consequence of this inner alignment, the external evidence begins to appear. Imagine this transformation clearly and specifically. You wake up tomorrow morning and consciously choose to see yourself as confident, powerful, loved, successful, healthy, and completely aligned with your highest potential. You carry that elevated image of yourself throughout your entire day, protecting it from contradictory evidence, watering it with positive emotions, refusing to let fear, doubt, or past failures choke it out. And slowly but surely, your actions begin to shift to match your new self-image. You walk differently, carrying yourself with dignity and purpose. You speak differently, using words that reflect your elevated consciousness. You make decisions differently, choosing options that align with your vision rather than your fears. And the world has no choice but to respond to this new version of you. Because energy attracts like energy. Consciousness creates corresponding circumstances, and who you're being internally determines what you experience externally. This is not just positive thinking or superficial attitude adjustment. This is inner engineering of the most profound kind. This is the sacred art of becoming the person you want to be before the external conditions support that transformation. Florence called this spiritual law in action. She taught that what you imagine with sustained feeling and unwavering belief becomes tangible form in your experience. She said, "Man can only receive what he sees himself receiving." That's not metaphorical or symbolic. That's exact and literal. So I challenge you to ask yourself these penetrating questions right now. What are you rehearsing in your mind today? What scenes are you playing and replaying in the theater of your imagination? What emotions are you feeding with your mental attention? What expectations are you building with your thoughts? Are these mental activities aligned with the life you say you want to create? Because here's a truth that might surprise you. You don't manifest what you wish for occasionally, or hope for casually. You manifest what you expect consistently and imagine repeatedly. And what you expect is directly shaped by what you imagine, rehearse, and give emotional weight to in your private moments. So guard your imagination like the sacred creative force it is. Shape it consciously like an artist shapes clay. Return to your desired vision daily like a gardener tends flowers. And never underestimate this profound truth. Your imagination is your creative power, your direct connection to infinite possibility, your personal workshop, where miracles are designed and constructed. Train it like your entire life depends on it, because in the most literal sense, it absolutely does. There's something you need to understand, at the deepest level of your being. Imagination isn't just a wonderful gift you've been given to make life more interesting or entertaining. It's a profound responsibility that comes with the power to create or destroy, to build up or tear down, to heal or harm, through the consistent direction of your mental energy. Most people don't deliberately misuse their imagination because they're malicious, lazy, or unconscious. They simply don't understand how incredibly powerful this faculty actually is, or how continuously it's operating in their lives. They spend countless hours imagining worst-case scenarios with vivid detail and intense emotion. They rehearse potential rejections, failures, and disappointments like actors preparing for important roles. They play these negative movies on constant repeat in their minds, and then express genuine surprise when life reflects exactly that fearful, limited energy back to them. Florence Scovel Shinn called this phenomenon the misuse of spiritual law. She believed with absolute conviction that every thought you give sustained emotion to is planting a seed in the fertile soil of your subconscious mind. The problem is that most people are unconsciously planting weeds of worry, doubt, and fear, then wondering why their life experience feels like an overgrown garden, completely out of control. Your imagination is not a place to indulge your fears, rehearse your anxieties, or entertain your doubts. It is a sacred space, a holy sanctuary, a divine workshop where you're meant to rehearse your victory, not your defeat. It's where you practice success, not failure. It's where you experience fulfillment, not frustration. Every time you imagine a version of yourself that is aligned, calm, powerful, successful, loved, and abundant, you're creating a detailed map that your subconscious can follow. And the more often you revisit that empowering inner image, the more familiar and natural it becomes to your entire system. Until one miraculous day, it doesn't feel like a fantasy anymore. Like something foreign or impossible. It feels like you, the real you, the true you, the you that was always meant to emerge and express itself fully. Let me ask you a question that might revolutionize your approach to mental discipline. How many hours have you spent over the past month imagining things you absolutely don't want to happen? How much emotional energy have you invested in worst-case scenarios, potential disasters, and unlikely catastrophes? What if you made a conscious decision right now to redirect just half of that mental energy toward imagining the best-case scenario instead? What if you began rehearsing success with the same intensity you once gave to failure? What if you started expecting breakthrough with the same emotional investment you once gave to breakdown? This isn't about delusion, denial, or ignoring practical reality. This is about training your subconscious mind to stop automatically expecting the worst possible outcomes and to start naturally preparing for the best possible results. That fundamental shift in expectation changes your entire posture toward life. It changes the energy you carry into every interaction. It changes your timing, your decision-making, your relationships, and ultimately, it changes your experience of reality itself. Florence said with profound insight, "Change your thoughts and in the twinkling of an eye, all your conditions change." And that transformation doesn't start in the external world of circumstances, events, and other people's behavior. It starts right here in the quiet, invisible, but incredibly powerful world of your imagination. You've been using this creative faculty your entire life, whether consciously or unconsciously. Now it's time to use it with deliberate intention, focused purpose, and complete awareness of its potential. And once you do, there is literally no limit to what you can create, experience, and become. When you begin using your imagination intentionally and consistently for positive creation, people around you might not understand what you're doing or why you seem different. They'll tell you to be realistic and lower your expectations. They'll say, "Don't get your hopes up too high," or "You're setting yourself up for disappointment." They'll try to bring you back down to what they consider earth, back to the level of limited thinking and small expectations that feels safe and familiar to them. But the profound truth is this: you were never meant to stay trapped at that level of consciousness. You were designed to rise, to expand, to grow, to become more than you've been before. And imagination is the ladder, the vehicle, the mechanism through which you ascend to higher levels of experience and expression. The world has been consistently changed, improved, and revolutionized by people who dared to imagine something no one else could see, feel, or believe in. Every significant invention, every meaningful work of art, every act of progress and innovation started as an image in someone's mind, long before it became visible in the physical world. So why do we act like using our imagination for positive creation is childish, unrealistic, or naive? It's not childish, it's divine. It's not unrealistic. It's the very mechanism through which reality is created. It's not naive. It's the most sophisticated understanding of how consciousness operates. You don't need to be logical, reasonable, and practical all the time. You need to be aligned with your vision, connected to your purpose, and committed to your highest potential. When you close your eyes and imagine the life you truly want, not as a distant dream that might someday possibly, maybe occur if everything goes perfectly, but as your daily reality that's already established and simply waiting to be experienced, something profound begins to shift inside your consciousness. And that internal shift is infinitely more powerful than any external strategy, technique, or method because of one crucial fact: the subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a real memory and a vividly imagined experience. It accepts whatever you give it repeatedly and treats it as established fact. So the most important question becomes, what are you feeding your subconscious mind today? Are you filling it with worry, doubt, regret, and fear? Are you programming it with images of limitation, struggle, and defeat? Or are you nourishing it with vision, clarity, peace, and confidence? Are you programming it with images of success, abundance, love, and joy? There's a documented story of a man who wanted to live in a specific house that seemed completely beyond his means. Instead of focusing on his current limitations, he imagined himself living in that exact home, walking through it in his mind, every single night for 6 months. He made the visualization so detailed that he could feel the texture of the walls, hear the creaking of certain floorboards, smell the garden through open windows, and sense the quality of sunlight streaming through specific rooms. He experienced the feeling of turning the key in the front door, the weight of it in his hand, the sound it made in the lock. He felt the satisfaction of being home, the peace of being in his own space, the joy of having exactly what he wanted. And 1 year later, almost to the exact day he began this practice, he found himself walking into that house as its new owner through a series of events he could never have orchestrated or predicted. No coincidence. No luck. No random good fortune. That was the power of sustained imagination, combined with unwavering belief, creating a bridge between vision and reality. Imagination creates reality, but not just any kind of imagination. It has to be felt deeply, experienced fully, and repeated consistently. It has to become more familiar than your current circumstances, more real than your present situation, more natural than your existing patterns. And when that happens through patient, persistent practice, something amazing unfolds in your experience. Your subconscious mind starts building an invisible bridge between where you are and where you want to be. And your external reality starts catching up to your internal vision with increasing speed and precision. You don't have to wait for perfect timing before you begin this practice. You don't have to wait for someone else to approve of your dreams or validate your vision. You don't even have to feel completely confident or totally free of doubt. You just have to begin. Right now. Today. In this moment. Wherever you are at this moment. Whether you realize it or not, your imagination is either working for you or against you. It's either building the future you desire or reinforcing the patterns you're trying to escape. It's either supporting your growth or maintaining your limitations. This is not about thinking positive thoughts and ignoring practical reality. This is about acknowledging and harnessing the power of what you consistently practice in your mind. Because repetition creates belief. Belief shapes behavior, and behavior builds reality. It always starts with small shifts. You begin by imagining yourself showing up differently in familiar situations, stronger, calmer, more confident, more centered. You imagine that important email getting sent with ease instead of anxiety. You imagine that difficult conversation going well instead of badly. You imagine the room welcoming you instead of rejecting you. You imagine peace where there used to be panic. You imagine abundance where there used to be fear. You imagine success where there used to be doubt. And you don't just visit these positive visions once in a moment of inspiration. You live in them regularly. You return to them daily. You make them more familiar than your fears. And eventually, that consistent internal image becomes more than a hope or wish. It becomes a knowing, a certainty, an expectation that shapes everything about how you move through the world. This is how reality begins to shift in your experience. You might not see dramatic results on day one, but your body will start to feel different as it responds to your new mental diet. Your energy will change as it aligns with your vision. Your voice will carry different vibrations that reflect your inner transformation. Your timing will improve as you begin moving from confidence rather than fear. Your decision-making will become clearer as you align with your vision rather than your limitations. Your relationships will evolve as people respond to the new energy you're carrying. And over time, through this consistent inner work, the world has no choice but to respond to who you've become internally. Not because something magical happened to you from outside, but because you finally remembered and reclaimed the truth about your creative power. You are the creator of your experience. You are the author of your story. You are the artist of your life. And the primary tool is already in your hands, your imagination. Use it now. Use it consciously. Use it consistently. And prepare to be amazed by what becomes possible when you align your creative power with your deepest desires and highest vision. If this message has spoken to something profound inside you, there's a reason. Don't let this moment fade away like so many others. Let this be the turning point where you decide to live with complete intention and conscious direction. Subscribe now to keep these transformative principles close to your awareness. Not just for temporary motivation, but for lasting mastery. Because this isn't about feeling good for 5 minutes. This is about becoming someone you recognize, respect, and trust completely. And that journey of transformation starts with a single decision: to take control of your imagination and use it to create the life you're truly meant to live.